What if one day you woke up and everything around you started to collapse, not because of war, but because of supernatural events that defy all logic? Imagine a powerful empire at the peak of its glory. Gods worshipped, rulers revered as divine. And then, suddenly, chaos unfolds. The river that sustains life turns to blood. Swarms of creatures invade the streets. Darkness blankets the land. Fear spreads like wildfire. The 10 Plagues of Egypt. One of the most terrifying stories in the Bible. A historical event that still raises questions to this day. Were these natural disasters or a direct act of God? Science has tried to explain these events with theories about ecological catastrophes, climate changes, and even volcanic eruptions. But the coincidences are too striking to ignore. Each plague directly challenged the Egyptian gods. Each one struck at the heart of Pharaoh's power, a ruler who was considered divine. The Egyptian empire was at its peak. Its golden temples gleamed under the scorching sun, and the vast Nile River stretched like a lifeline through the heart of the kingdom. Pharaoh sat on his throne, not just as a ruler, but as a living god, a bridge between the divine and the mortal world. His word was absolute, his power unquestioned. Egypt was a land of wealth and wonder. Monuments soared into the sky, built by thousands of workers who toiled under the belief that they were shaping eternity. The economy thrived, fueled by trade, fertile lands, and an intricate system of governance. But more than anything, Egypt was a land of gods. From the powerful Ammon-Ra, the sun god, to Hapi, the god of the Nile, and Osiris, ruler of the afterlife, every aspect of Egyptian life was intertwined with their deities. Their favor ensured prosperity, their wrath brought misfortune. It was believed that as long as Pharaoh maintained harmony, or Ma'at, the gods would bless Egypt. But something was about to change. The identity of the Pharaoh who defied Moses remains one of history's greatest debates. Was it Ramses II, the mighty warrior king whose name was etched across Egypt? Or was it Amenhotep II, a ruler known for his arrogance and military campaigns? Some theories even point to Thutmose III or Merneptah, based on ancient inscriptions and timelines. Whoever he was, one thing is certain, he refused to bow. When Moses arrived in Pharaoh's court demanding the release of the Israelites, it wasn't just a political confrontation. It was a battle of faith. The Egyptian gods were seen as invincible, and Pharaoh, their earthly representative, could not afford to show weakness. So when Moses warned of coming plagues, Pharaoh laughed. Egypt had survived droughts, invasions, and even rebellions. But what was about to happen was unlike anything Egypt had ever seen. The first plague was about to strike. And it would shake the empire to its core. It started suddenly. Fishermen cast their nets into the river, expecting a bountiful catch, but when they pulled them back, the water was no longer blue. It was red, deep, thick, and unnatural. The lifeblood of Egypt had turned into something horrifying. Panic spread along the riverbanks. People scooped water into jars, hoping it was just a trick of the light. But the stench of decay filled the air. Dead fish floated to the surface, their lifeless bodies poisoning the currents. The Nile, the sacred river that sustained the empire, had become undrinkable. The priests rushed to the temples, offering sacrifices to Hapi, the god of the Nile. But their prayers were met with silence. Egypt relied on the Nile for everything: drinking water, irrigation, food, and trade. With the river poisoned, the nation was crippled. Farmers couldn't water their crops. Fishermen lost their livelihoods overnight. The people, who had always trusted their gods to protect them, were terrified. Pharaoh, however, remained unmoved. His magicians stepped forward and, through their secret arts, managed to replicate the phenomenon on a smaller scale. "This is nothing but a trick," Pharaoh declared, waving Moses away. "The gods of Egypt are still strong." But the suffering of the people was real. For 7 days, the Nile remained a river of blood, its waters bringing only death. Could this have been a natural disaster? Some scientists suggest that a toxic algal bloom, known as red tide, could have turned the water red and killed the fish. Others proposed that a volcanic eruption, possibly from Santorini, released minerals into the river, causing the same effect. But if it was a natural event, why did it happen at the exact moment Moses warned Pharaoh? And why was it only the beginning? As the Nile festered and rotted, something else began to stir. The next plague was rising from the waters. And it would drive Egypt into deeper chaos. At first, the people thought it was a blessing. Frogs, sacred to the goddess Hecate, were everywhere, on the riverbanks, in the fields, even inside the temples. But soon, admiration turned to horror. Frogs began pouring out of the Nile in unnatural numbers. They invaded homes, leapt into beds, and filled the streets. The royal palace was no exception. Servants screamed as they found frogs in their food, under their pillows, even inside Pharaoh's throne room. The infestation was relentless. People couldn't sleep. They couldn't eat. Everywhere they turned, there were frogs, croaking, writhing, and dying. And when they died, their bodies rotted in the streets, adding to the stench of the already tainted Nile. Pharaoh, unable to ignore the suffering of his people, called for Moses. "Pray to your God to take them away," he demanded. "And I will let your people go." Moses prayed, and as suddenly as they came, the frogs died. But Pharaoh's heart hardened. He refused to let the Israelites leave. And then came something worse. It began as an itch. Then, a crawling sensation. Soon, Egyptians were scratching their skin raw. Swarms of tiny insects, possibly lice or gnats, filled the air, covering people and animals alike. The priests, who prided themselves on ritual cleanliness, were humiliated. They could no longer perform their sacred duties, their bodies covered in filth. Pharaoh's magicians, who had mimicked the first two plagues, tried to replicate this one, but they failed. "This is the finger of God," they admitted. But Pharaoh still refused to listen. Some experts believe that the plague of frogs led directly to the outbreak of lice. With the Nile poisoned and frogs dying en masse, insects multiplied unchecked. The disruption of the ecosystem could have caused an explosion in lice and other pests. But could all of this really be coincidence? The plagues were escalating, one leading into the next. And Egypt's suffering was only beginning. Something even more terrifying was on its way. The air was thick with the hum of wings. At first, it was just a few flies, buzzing lazily through the streets. But within hours, the sky darkened with swarms so dense they blocked out the sun. Flies covered everything. They crawled into food, swarmed over people's faces, and filled every corner of every home. Their bites left festering wounds, their filth spread disease. Even inside Pharaoh's palace, the golden halls were tainted by the constant buzzing of insects. Egyptians had always believed they were protected by their gods. But now, it seemed as though those same gods had abandoned them. Then, without warning, the cattle began to die. Horses, donkeys, camels, sheep, one by one, they collapsed. Farmers watched in horror as entire herds perished overnight. Egypt's wealth was not only measured in gold but in livestock. These animals were their source of food, transportation, and labor. Losing them meant losing stability. Panic set in. Pharaoh's own advisors begged him to reconsider. "Egypt is being ruined," they warned. But Pharaoh would not yield. Scientists suggest that the previous plagues created the perfect conditions for these disasters. The rotting carcasses of frogs and fish may have led to an explosion of flies, which in turn spread deadly diseases among livestock. Some believe an epidemic, possibly anthrax, could have wiped out Egypt's animals. But the question remains, why did all of these plagues strike in such rapid succession, just as Moses had foretold? Egypt's people were beginning to ask the same thing. Their faith in Pharaoh was crumbling. And the worst was still to come. Egyptians had endured suffering before. But nothing had prepared them for what came next. Without warning, painful boils erupted across people's bodies. Swollen, pus-filled sores covered their skin, bringing agony with every movement. No one was spared, rich or poor, soldier or servant, even Pharaoh's own magicians. The once proud priests, who prided themselves on ritual purity, were left helpless, unable to stand before Pharaoh in their diseased state. This was no ordinary illness. It spread rapidly, infecting humans and animals alike. The people of Egypt, who had worshipped their gods for protection, now lived in constant pain and fear. Even then, Pharaoh refused to surrender. Then, the heavens unleashed their fury. Dark storm clouds gathered, and thunder rumbled over the land. The Egyptians looked to the sky in terror as hailstones, larger than any they had ever seen, began to fall. But this was no ordinary storm. As the hail crashed down, fire streaked through the air, flames burning amid the ice. Crops were destroyed. Fields were flattened. Homes were reduced to rubble. Those who failed to take shelter were struck down, their bodies broken by the storm. For the first time, Pharaoh showed hesitation. He called for Moses. "I have sinned," he admitted. "The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Pray for the storm to stop, and I will let your people go." Moses prayed. The storm ended. But as soon as the skies cleared, Pharaoh's heart hardened once more. He would not let the Israelites leave. Some scientists proposed that the hailstorm could have been caused by a massive volcanic eruption, possibly from Santorini, which sent ash into the atmosphere and triggered extreme weather patterns. But could a simple weather event explain the fire mixed with ice? With each plague, the disasters were growing worse. The land was crumbling, the people were suffering, and Pharaoh was losing his grip on power. And yet, he still refused to bow. But the next plague would leave Egypt in absolute darkness. Egypt was barely standing. The people were starving. The land, once green and abundant, lay in ruins. But just when they thought things couldn't get any worse, something even more terrifying appeared on the horizon. A low hum filled the air. Then, the sky darkened, not with clouds, but with an unstoppable wave of destruction. Millions of insects descended upon Egypt like a living storm. They covered the ground in a thick, writhing mass, devouring everything in sight. No leaf, no blade of grass, no crop was spared. The Egyptians, desperate, tried to fight them off with fire, with cloth, with their bare hands, but it was useless. In a single day, the remaining food supply of the empire was gone. Even Pharaoh's officials were beginning to break. "How long will this man be a snare to us?" they begged him. "Let the Israelites go before Egypt is completely destroyed." For a brief moment, Pharaoh wavered. He called for Moses. "I will let your people go," he said, "but only the men. The women and children must stay." But Moses refused. "We must all go." Pharaoh's pride burned. He would not be dictated to. And so, he drove Moses away, sealing Egypt's fate. The ninth plague, darkness covers the land. Then, something unnatural happened. The sun, the very symbol of Egyptian power, disappeared. A thick, oppressive darkness fell over the land. For 3 days, not a single beam of light shone. Torches barely flickered, as if the very air was swallowing the flames. The people of Egypt cowered in their homes, trapped in an endless night. Ra, the mighty sun god, had been defeated. And Pharaoh, who was believed to be his living embodiment, was powerless. But even in total darkness, Pharaoh refused to surrender. "You may go," he told Moses. "But leave your livestock behind." Moses shook his head. "Not a single hoof will remain." Pharaoh's rage exploded. "Get away from me. If you ever see my face again, you will die." Moses looked at him one last time. "You have spoken the truth. I will never see your face again. The final plague was coming. And this time, Pharaoh would have no choice but to let them go. The night fell over Egypt, and a deadly tension hung in the air. The final plague, the most devastating of all, was about to unfold. The Egyptians, with heavy hearts and eyes turned toward the sky, awaited the calamity that was coming. This plague was not just another event in a series, but the climax of a battle between divine power and human pride. The death of the firstborn was the final fate decreed for Pharaoh's children in every Egyptian, without exception. When the plague finally struck, it was a brutal shock to the entire Egyptian society. The Egyptians, with their rich culture and deep religious beliefs, had always trusted in a divine order that governed them. But now, they faced the terror of losing what they loved most. Egyptian homes, one by one, witnessed the tragedy unfold. Mourning echoed throughout the land. Parents wept for their children, and the silence of an entire nation was shattered only by the cries of pain. Pharaoh, who had once resisted Moses' demand, saw his own household destroyed, which led him to a level of despair he had never imagined. Yet, in the midst of such sorrow, a sign of hope arose. Moses, instructed by God, had given the Israelites a way to protect themselves from the plague that would strike Egypt. They were to sacrifice a lamb, mark their doorposts with its blood, and, as a sign, death would pass over their homes. The blood of the lamb became not just a symbol of protection but also of redemption. It was a reminder that through sacrifice, death could be avoided, and life restored. This event would later become the origin of Passover, one of the most significant celebrations in Jewish tradition, marking the liberation of the Israelites. The blood of the lamb, the sacrifice that brought freedom, remained central to religious practice and the collective memory of a nation. That night, while Egyptian homes were filled with sorrow, the Israelite families were safe, their doorposts marked by the promise of protection. Egypt, as the final plague took its toll, could no longer ignore the power of God. Pharaoh, finally broken, realized there was no more resistance left. The storm of plagues had come to an end. Pharaoh's surrender, after the loss of his own son, marked the end of an era of defiance and arrogance. He had no more choices. With a heavy heart and a nation devastated by grief, he finally yielded to Moses' request. The Exodus, long awaited by the Israelites, was about to become reality. The people of Israel, who had suffered so long under the Egyptian yoke, were now on the verge of being freed. Their feet, once shackled by the hot sands of Egypt, would soon step on free soil. The promise of a new beginning was finally within their grasp. And so, the great Exodus began. The people of Israel, with their belongings packed full of hopes and dreams, prepared to leave behind all they had known, heading toward freedom and the promised land. It was a painful journey, but a necessary one. And the darkest night of Egypt would become the memory of a rebirth. The story of the plagues in Egypt is much more than an ancient tale, it holds powerful lessons that still resonate today. At its core, it's about the consequences of human actions, the idea of justice, and the transformation that can arise from suffering. The plagues served as a wake-up call, a reminder that every decision we make can have far-reaching consequences, not just for ourselves, but for others too. Pharaoh's refusal to listen to the cries of the oppressed led to a series of devastating events, showing us that ignoring injustice only leads to more. Whether we see the plagues as a divine act or the result of natural disasters, the message is clear: actions matter. In today's world, we face our own plagues in the form of environmental disasters, social inequality, and political unrest. These challenges, much like the plagues of Egypt, are a result of neglecting our responsibilities as carrot. But the story of the Exodus isn't just about suffering, it's also about hope and redemption. The Israelites' journey from slavery to freedom is a powerful symbol of how, even in the darkest times, change is possible. Just as they found a way to break free, we too have the power to make a difference in the world. Our choices, no matter how small. Now, we must ask ourselves, how will we respond to the challenges we face? Will we continue down a path of disregard, or will we choose a better future for ourselves and future generations? The lessons of the plagues remind us that it's never too late to make a see. If this story resonated with you, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video, share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire us to reflect, learn, and grow. Remember, true change starts with the decisions we make today.